We're in. We're in.
Oh, okay.
Wonderful.
Hello, everyone.
That's how you do it.
And welcome to Deadly Dungeon, the community dungeon show presented by Wriggle Goblins and hosted by me, Nik Bowen. Today, we are doing our post-mortem of the dungeon. And unlike most weeks, we don't have any cams at the top of our screen today. We're just going to have me featured here, but I have a number of guests with us today who graciously offered to come and hang out with me while we do dungeon stuff. So can't even hear my music.
No, don't introduce us at all.
Nope.
We're just the voices in your head today.
We're doing it. So, joining me today, we have Shadow.
Hello, hello.
Granite.
Hey.
Russ Owl.
Thank you. Hello, hello.
Rumble Roar.
Yo.
And John DM.
I also go by the name of Shadow as well on Twitch. You can just at him whenever you disagree with me.
I also go by Shadow on Twitch now. Okay. We're going to have a goofy stream today because we're not trying to kill any players, or any characters. We're never trying to kill players. Never
the truth comes out.
So, for those of you joining me, whether you're on Twitch or watching this on YouTube, I'm going to have some links in the description for you. I am posting a link to a public Roll20 copy of our dungeon today. I am posting a Google Doc with my notes on a lot of stuff, which we're going to go over, and I am also posting a Word document with just some thoughts, directions on how to run your own copy of Deadly Dungeon and contacting me for that information. Also, my macros will be listed there, and just lots of other cool information, which we're going to go over today. So first, let's take a look at my agenda right here below me. Our agenda today, we will be discussing the dungeon itself, and we're first going to start with the principles of the dungeon, and my principles as a GM, because that's going to kind of frame everything. Like, everything about the dungeon points back to those principles. So I think it's a really important place to start. Yes, Ignorance, we will want all of these in the description, and I will send them to you after the show. Thank you very much.
Can we get a copy of your manifesto as well?
Yeah.
For your rules?
Absolutely.
I think every DM should also have one. So if you don't, you're a bad DM. At Scarlet Shadow W in the chat if you disagree with me.
Oh my god, I'm running into this thing where I'm trying to copy my things from OneNote, and Discord likes to take the text and be like, that's a picture, right? So I need to do some quick copy pasting here. So these links are also going to be in the community Discord in the Deadly Dungeon See Pins section. So I will go ahead and pin it right now. Oh yeah, pin it. Oh yeah, pin it. So we're going to talk about the principles of the dungeon in my GMing style. We're going to talk about the history of the Deadly Dungeon, when I made it, how I made it, how long it took to make it. Brief history there. We'll talk about the broad mechanics of the dungeon and lore, not specific to any particular floor. Then we will talk about kind of how did it go? Did we achieve what we wanted to? What did we learn about dungeon crawls? This is the kind of what was our experience playing Deadly Dungeon as a community. I will go over my Google Doc and notes on how to run your own version of Deadly Dungeon, should you want to do that. And then the last thing we'll do is we will go through every floor, look at all of my notes on the GM layer. We will examine everything and answer all questions you have. And I have a huge list here in my outline here. So let's start with my principles, and I'm actually going to move over to my Running Deadly Dungeon document that I just linked for you all. We're going to skip a lot of this, and we're going to just go right to my principles for Deadly Dungeon. So my principles as a designer of this dungeon have always been: be a fan of the players, be a dispassionate dungeon running experiments trying to kill the player characters, make every encounter memorable, make every floor lethal. And since this is a document on how to run your own Deadly Dungeon, if you are planning on running your own dungeons and encounters in the future, how lethal you want it to be is up to you. I certainly wasn't as lethal as I could have been most weeks.
Some might say you showed mercy even
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
You are liars, every one of you. Nick is
Well,
a cold,
I'm gonna go ahead and
murderer.
point right back up to the first bullet point. Be a fan of the players. Everything should come at a reasonable cost or risk, or be earned. Nothing should be free. So, when you all attempt to take rests, when you go for treasure, when you try and cheese my encounters, there should be risks. And I, as a GM, had to be really flexible when you all thought of really creative stuff to try and make sure that there was a cost, or at least a serious risk. You know, there should be a cost of expendable resources, of HP, of time, which would force other mechanics. Or, you know, if you all engaged in some fun and healthy and entertaining roleplay, that is a cost. And I rewarded roleplay. So that's something to think about here. Don't make them roll unless there's a chance of failure. So many times I see GMs doing Dungeons and Dragons go, oh, give me a perception check, and someone rolls really well, and they're just like, you don't see anything, because there wasn't nothing. Well, why'd you have them roll? People go, oh, I searched the room, and I'm like, how long do you spend doing that? Okay, well, you find nothing. I'm not going to make you roll for that. Spend as much time as you want, but there's nothing there, so no roll. And then finally, no insta-death mechanics. I am not a fan of those. And there was, I think our second floor, we had someone die very quickly to some traps. Looking at you, Jamie K. But I did at least have you roll
Emmer
twice.
too.
So.
Emmer as well.
Yes. So we will return to this document, but those are just kind of some of my principles. When I was designing the dungeon, when I was looking at every encounter, when I was designing the whole dungeon mechanics, and when I was arbitrating the game. So these are kind of those things to keep in the back of your mind, and I will point back to as go through the dungeon. So next on our agenda is some of the history of the game. And I should mention, if you have questions in the chat, like if you have questions for me, and maybe you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to message me on Discord if you have lingering questions, or post them in the Deadly Dungeon channels of the Regal Goblins Discord. Or if you are watching with us live, please tag me so I can see that little highlight in the chat, and make sure I don't miss any of your awesome questions. A quick history of this dungeon. I started making this in summer 2020. I made 2 floors, and I made this as kind of a small project for something to do when one of my main groups that I do tabletop with, like if we had a down week with too many people out, we could just run that quickly, and also like rehash some of my favorite encounters from Fatal One with students. I work at a college and am the advisor to our D&D club. So I made this dungeon as an opportunity to engage with my students. And for the most part, it just looked like Fatal One encounters with a couple of my own small designs. And any of the ones that we've seen that resemble Fatal One encounters, those were in that first version like a year ago. After I ran it a couple times, I decided to make it longer and kind of conceived this idea of streaming it. So I started to just build it and grow it a little bit here and there over time. I grabbed a couple of my students and play tested the whole thing with them. At the time, there was probably like 6 floors. And then around then, in the middle of testing that, I reached out to Neil to inquire if he'd be interested in letting me run this show. And we talked over the course of a couple months. I kept adding content. And when we started to lean towards, yes, this is something he was interested in hosting on the channel, I was like, ooh, I should really use as many art assets that aren't going to be like a copyright issue. So I redid the entire dungeon with art from Forgotten Adventures, which is an amazing website with so many art assets. I recommend checking it out for any of you for assets to design your own custom maps. So we agreed to the dungeon. Neil and I ran through a lot of it, and he gave me a lot of great feedback on mechanics, on encounters, balance, and pacing. And I redid a lot of encounters and even a couple entire floors over the course of the next few months. Even while we were running the show, I was making a lot of updates. And that became really necessary because in our first episode, I realized how underpowered the dungeon was when the Artificer was just pumping out temp HP and I was doing 0 damage. Koibu, your feedback was essential, quintessential.
Was it along the lines of just try to kill the players better?
No. It was
Too long of a pause.
Your hesitation
such
says
a long
everything.
No. This is me thinking of like what were some of the specifics, and also I looked at my tab that has Neil notes, and I ended up deleting all of them for some reason. But I do remember him talking about like really quickly. He was just like, yeah, okay, so if every encounter is on average like an hour, and we have this many encounters on each floor, so that it's going to be about this long. And I was like, ooh, shit, some of those are going to be way too long, and they ended up being way too long after I did some cutbacks. But he also gave me a lot of recommendations on like specific mechanics that were just going to be either not very harmful or costly, and some that he thought might be too much. Yeah, and for those of you who can recall, there was even a critical feedback where I presented the author, the final boss of this dungeon, and asked him for feedback on it. That was like over a year ago, though, so if you don't remember, no harm.
Must have missed that one.
Yeah. So yeah, when I realized how unlethal the dungeon was, especially the first floor, I quickly started tuning encounters. In fact, like as they were going, like they hit the kobold room and fireballed it, I started like increasing what I had like done. Like I started tuning some of the character sheets. I started removing loot because they weren't going to need as much loot for longevity through floors. And I basically tuned up most of the encounters in the dungeon. Either added creatures or added just other features. So we'll talk about that as we explore the dungeon.
Hey, quick question, Nick, while you're at a momentary pause. Do you have a link for Forgotten Adventures that you would like to post in the chat so that other people can find it? Because I'd love to put it on the wiki, too.
Yeah, it's just forgotten-adventures.net. I will put that right here.
A lot of their stuff is also on Roll20. So if you want to support Roll20, you can just buy token packs, art assets from there as well.
Ignorance asks in the chat, was there ever a point where you thought to yourself mid-session, I might have made this a bit too hard or something along those lines? Absolutely. There are encounters I tuned way back. I'll talk more about those, but one that comes to mind was the Court of the Raven King, with I think this group, Shadow and Party here, minus John. They got to the Raven King, and it was such a close fight. And I hadn't planned on, as soon as the king dies, the ravens disperse. But it felt like an earned win, so I just let it happen. And I remained flexible that way. I think the week prior in the terrifying workshop of Dr. Frank L. Goblinstein, I think it was really similar. I hadn't even planned on Goblinstein being an active character that they would attack and need to fight. It was just supposed to be the whatever that mech is called. I'm already spacing on stuff. I'm just like emptying my mind of all the stuff I've had to hold in it for a year.
We'll get to that floor.
But yeah,
I need to talk. I want to go to that floor.
We'll get there. We'll get there. I promise. Yeah. Oh yeah. Neil in the chat, going back to like some of his notes. Yeah, some floors were just too long. He's like, this looks like 2 floors, and it absolutely was. And yeah, he presented like what happens if a party finishes on the first run. So he was just checking me on my mechanics and how they translated, also to like the rules I established for parties and queuing up for the dungeon. So lots of great feedback there. High concept stuff.
Yeah, I think the Raven Queen was when Shadow moonlighted out and did a whole different group. Didn't want to join with us.
It was me and Leova and Millman and Zymox, I believe.
Yeah. So, yeah. Returning here, Leova asked me, I have just a long list of questions that people posted in the Discord. Leova asked, Did you have to modify the dungeon or mechanics since players began running it? If so, for what reasons? And I wrote here almost immediately. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything stuff was just a flat buff. Honestly, like a lot of those subclasses did just a lot. They outperformed a lot of stuff. As we will see when we look at class options. I have all the stats on that. So I lowered rewards, increased the number of creatures. I beefed up some of my custom creatures, so I didn't like necessarily increase like the stat blocks of like Dungeon Master Guide or Monster Manual creatures. I just left those as is, but I might have increased them. Yeah, and then I promised to myself I'd play my hardest, but that became really hard to do with these really long sessions and being really like tired. I'm not a late night person, so I had honestly a hard time concentrating throughout a lot of this. And this
It was still early for you.
You weren't the only one that had trouble concentrating towards the end of the streams.
And I think
got
that's
late,
also
but it was
why
fun.
I gave some grace. And I like, you know, if people were acting out of turn, I wasn't like doing the 5 HP damage every time and letting people take movement back and that kind of stuff, because I was also doing it. Let's see here. So Ignorance asked me what was the most annoying technical detail I had to deal with when actually putting together the assets for the dungeon. Well, the fact that I redid the entire dungeon and replaced every art asset was one thing. And then most of the way through the show, Roll20 was like, oh, and by the way, legacy lighting is gone. You have to use the new dynamic lighting. So I had to redo not only the lighting, like the drawing of lighting and light effects, like add light like disbursement to like the torches and stuff throughout the entire dungeon. I had to update all of my monster tokens, every single token. So it was
within a week.
It was a lot. Well, I did it a little bits at a time as needed. Basically, the week before the show, I would update that floor. Yeah. So that was annoying as hell. And then, of course, layering. You know, on a map, every single asset is in a certain position. So sometimes layering was challenging. The final note I have here on the dungeon history, together, including, I'm sure, what will be this video by the time we're done here, we will have produced as a community 110 hours of content. So well done, y'all. This was
high fives, guys.
A good project. So let's jump into dungeon mechanics and lore. So I'm gonna go ahead and open up the sheet for the dungeon, the character sheet for the dungeon.
Oh my god.
I'm gonna go ahead and just show this to players, so you all here should see a character sheet open up.
Your notes are so well organized.
I keep in mind I wrote this like well before I started, so some things might have changed. So, pacing. The dungeon is erased as it is cleared. If the party is not advancing, the space begins to disappear. Roll a d20 4 consecutive times to determine how long it takes the current space, room, so to speak, to begin to disappear. The first time you roll a 1 to 5 when this move triggers, multiply it by 10. So this is how, what kind of set the pace for how quickly the room began to lose color and completely lose color and begin to lose definition and finish losing definition and turn white. After the first d20's rounds of time, the environment begins to lose color and so on and so forth. The features will become less and less complex until they become plain versions of themselves with no definition. If the party is actively casting a spell with a long cast time, the effect extends, but the party is left with an incredibly unsafe and unsettling feeling, and the room will give them just enough time to get out before disappearing completely. So, if you all were to be using a spell, you had spent the spell slot, I didn't want to just take that from you. That would feel shitty. So that's when those moments where people were casting like 10-minute long spells where there were squiggle lines that would begin to manifest, and people would just get this really uncomfortable feeling. That was me kind of showing that effect. So the room and all its contents eventually disappear into a blank white void as it is erased. Anything that remains disappears. The effect extends to objects the party takes with them, except chest contents, and anything the GM determines doesn't disappear. I like to write things really vague to leave myself room to interpret, especially when you all come up with creative and fun circumstances for me to do stuff in. For example, I never planned for the author to leave behind a journal. So that came up later, and that just became something I decided doesn't disappear. Everything else did. You all tried to take armor. You all tried to take, well, I guess I gave you arrows sometimes, but weapons, they eventually would disappear. So this is kind of how the magic of the space works. What do you all think of this? Any questions about disappearing?
No, the pacing, that's after you killed all the monsters, right? Or would that have happened if we would just been a standoff against the monsters and they weren't moving and they still were alive?
Yeah, so you all propose this idea of like constraining a monster to force this effect to not remain or not begin happening. It probably you never put me in this position, so I never had to make a decision, but I either would have forced the monster to act or started this effect anyway. There's
You've had before. Which room was it? Was it the OSHA group that was stalling, and you had the author start talking to them, and that's the first time we met her?
Yes. Yep. I think it was in
Wait,
Journey to the
which
Center of
OSHA
the
group?
Earth.
Because it
first
wasn't
OSHA
mine.
Maybe it was the second one.
So yes, that was me using the author character to show you that character existed and just kind of like tease what was to come, and foreshadow a little bit, but also to like nudge you all very strongly, like keep moving or things are going to get bad. So I was kind of there's a phrase in writing which is like reveal a gun before you fire it. Because you don't want there to be violence or this sudden cost that was unexpected in writing. You want the author to know what the stakes are, or sorry, not the author, the reader to know what the stakes are before the stakes are used and taken from the character. So that was me showing you all the barrel of a gun, effectively, because they were refusing to move, and this was like, here's your final warning. John, in the chat, you bring up, or someone was asking about rituals spells and how this effect would have manifested there. I did not consider rituals to be spending a resource since it doesn't spend a spell slot, so this would have consumed the characters if they sat there. And I think there were times where people did do rituals, or maybe there was one, and I was like very clear, like, there are no squiggles this time. Everything is turning white. What do you do? And going back to that, I don't like insta-death mechanics. I did have this one, but I pressured you all so much, I forced you all not to confront it. Unless you had given up. So
I think you made that pretty clear that bad shit was going to happen. Mm-hmm. I think you foreshadowed that pretty well.
Yeah, and I think I also foreshadowed it when you all, I think the first group took the jerseys from the first room. The goblins they were the fans, battling each other.
Hell yeah.
They took the jersey, and it eventually disappeared. So that was me also kind of, foreshadowing what the effect was.
I think it was Temer and Jamie that sat there and watched everything fade out in one of the episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. That was the OSHA group. The real OSHA group.
Yeah. Okay. So, any other thoughts or questions about pacing? And if you come up with them later, feel free to ask. We can always jump back.
I really like this as a narrative tool. Just when you brought this up to me, and I'm going to be legit with you, I had only watched the previous week's game,
mm-hmm.
and it was with the workshop and the mind flayer and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And when you started describing this room and how it was starting to fade out, I'm like, I figured it out. We're climbing out. We're gonna go fight the game. We're gonna go fight Apollo Nik in real life. That's how this ends. So I was super hyped and fulfilled when Stargate SG-1 showed up and did just that.
Yes.
So good payoff there for me.
Yeah. So revisiting, what was some of the advice Neil gave me and constructive criticism. One of the things he did was one of the biggest things he said that really tied all this together narratively and kind of forced me to think about it, which I hadn't done, was what narratively is tying all of these floors together? Like, you clearly have these themes, and that's how I had made it, is there were just themes. None of these were tied to, like, stories, like books. And he kind of was like, what's tying all this together? And so I had to come up with that. And so this idea, and we'll get to like what the dungeon actually physically was, what the magic of it was, kind of forced me to tie all of it together, which is why, the notion of like things being erased, and why I kept using the Take On Me music video as like a source material for the disappearing, what that looked like. It's literally like it becomes pencil drawing and it erases, and it's like, Flatland. What did those characters experience if they're living on a piece of paper and it just disappears?
I like Leova just posted basically what I was gonna say. But like dragging in narrative characters and like broadening people's I guess opportunity to do more thematic groups sort of leaned heavily into that as well.
Yeah, it really did.
Really cool.
And I didn't expect that from groups. I was really upfront, like, RP is fun and I encourage it, but it's not necessary to do this because at its core it's a board game that we're playing. But I really appreciated that the community really leaned into, the notion of like heroes and stories and adventurers and this adversity, because, essentially what the dungeon was a simulation of stories that the author fed her spellbook and running it like machine learning algorithms and learning to play like games, like we have AI that learn to play League of Legends better than humans and beat us at chess. That's what she was doing with Magic to figure out.
I wish that was the case, Nick. Don't bring up League, man.
Cursed. So yeah,
I think that first group actually really helped push that too with Back to the Future theme.
Yeah. And it was really funny because I wasn't expecting groups to role play, and then it forced me to be like, oh my god, what if the parties are part of it? What if they find their own storybook? So I had to like on the spot for that group come up with like, what's like a knockoff name for that, which is why I called them what did I call that party? I've got it right here. Return to Tomorrow.
That was good.
Okay.
And I also love the when I forget who it was, did something about trying to figure out what magic was there, and he almost got blinded. I forget what spell he used.
It was just detect magic, and that
just detect magic. That's what it was.
Yeah,
but and then there was that one that nobody knew what it was. That had me interested.
Pretensomancy.
What a transition that is.
Yeah, that's a great transition. We'll get to that in a second. But yeah,
nice segue.
I had just in one of my other groups that I GM for, they had just done like it's in Dungeon World, so they can fail spells, and I let them cast this spell, but they got like an effect. Like I gave them blinded or something for a period of time, and it was just like I found inspiration from another one of my games to like I think I forced a con save to make them like overwhelmed or not, because everything was literally just covered in magic. So yeah, let's take a look at magic appearance really quick before we double back to new chapter. So magic appearance, detect magic. Everything is conjuration because everything is created with magic. The entire thing, including the characters. Basic doors have conjuration and abjuration. So if you all had tried to mess with doors in ways I didn't like, the doors would have responded in kind. One thing I had in my back pocket was if someone tried to battering ram a door, the battering ram would turn into something else, like a balloon animal, or like I would random search something and it would just turn into that. A bag of flour. You all love bags of flour, so that actually would have been really useful for you all.
Oh, that would have been great. It would have hit and exploded all over them. That would have been fantastic.
Yeah.
I did have a question about
bags of flour.
Yeah. What if somebody used knock?
That would have been fine. That was one of the ways to open doors, and I would allow people to abuse door mechanics if it cost them something, a spell slot. So I would have been fine with that. Now there was one door in particular that would have not allowed that. and that was the door in the one with the floating disc, which specifically had a keyhole and was the only door that had one. That one had a ton of additional magic, which we'll see in the notes. So yeah, you all forced me on the spot to come up with colors for all of the other magic, and then I think Shadow went like deep into the mathematics crunching of like, oh, the torches on each floor are different colors. Does that mean that there's like specific magic? And nope. I'm glad you thought of it, Shadow. I'm glad you thought of it.
We had so many plans.
There was so much evidence to support the theory that I didn't want to throw it away.
It was just a happy accident, it seems like now.
Yeah.
It was good.
All that work.
Okay, so moving on, let's talk about pretensomancy, because that's this new color, the pink violet, which I think I let Temur choose the color for, or I let someone.
It was Griffin.
Griffin, yes. Yep. So pretensomancy, that's the truth of this whole dungeon. Is it's all a simulation, and the author just fed it stories from the multiverse, which I don't know how she accessed them, but she did, and the book just ran tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of simulations for her, and we didn't see most of them. And ultimately, I don't know what she found, but it's just simulation magic. In my role at work, I'm an academic advisor for machine learning students. So sometimes they tell me about AI, and so I picked up on that. And machine learning is interesting. But I kind of like this loose tie into some of Neil's stuff, especially since like I had been kind of tuning in and out of Tombs of Scoria, so I wanted like something relevant to Neil's viewers that they could latch onto, given his advice of find something that ties this all together. I kind of, through those journals you all found, constructed this story of the author coming to this land from another land that was also oppressed. I'm particularly interested in Scoria's rule over this land that Neil's created. And I think she's just someone that's like, I'm not going to sit here and accept this. A lot of people are either too afraid or just are happy with the status quo because they're benefiting from it. She is not that person. She wants to find people who can confront Scoria and win. She, of course, doesn't believe that the McGarry brothers, or whatever the fuck Tombs of Scoria's characters are called, she doesn't believe that they're it. And maybe they will be. Cool. Looking forward to that episode. But she's using her own magic to try and pave a way. So I kind of consider this to be, well, obviously non-canonical to Neil's stuff, but I liked the tie-in. Okay, I'm noting some of the other questions people are putting in the chat here. We'll get to the... Well, actually, I'll just answer these right here. So Leova asks, did you up your RP to match the player levels? I love those metal golem guardians that had the riddles and tasks. Yes, I absolutely upped my RP when other people were RPing because I want to meet people where they're at in the fun that they're having. And of course, if the fun they find in the game is just playing and trying to win, yeah, if that's what's fun for them, I'll match them on that. It's all good. It's all fun to me. So I didn't really care. And I like to match people on that. Neil in the chat asks me my biggest regret of the game. I think it's letting you get away from the T-Rex, Neil. Honestly, I think it is. You all subverted an encounter, and that kind of like, when y'all subverted encounters, it kind of disappointed me because I had put, especially that one, that was its own map. I had put so much time and effort into designing that encounter.
No.
Jeez. So
I figured you would have said artificers. To be honest.
It was. I enjoyed trying the new Tasha's stuff, and it ended up moving the game along at a good pace because we've been playing for what, like 6 months, 5 months.
6 months, yeah.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know if I have a lot more in me. If this were to go on for another couple months, if we had not boosted the strength of the parties with Tasha's stuff, it would have been hard. I got a lot going on. The nights are getting really hot, and this room, this is like 3rd story, so I am hot. I'm sweating here. So just for lots of reasons, going longer would have been rough. Okay, moving on. A new chapter. So, when transitioning between floors, the dungeon's mechanic removes all effects and benefits of features that are time-based they are lost. Spells are dispelled, magic is lost, effects stop, and so on. Items that regain charges do not regain charges regardless of the amount of time that passes. So that's basically just, if you are going to continue, you have to start from scratch, and that just is to decrease the longevity of parties to keep it so they can't snowball too hard, and also to ensure that like decision making about using those long-lasting spells is a critical decision, because like if you have an 8-hour spell, it's not going to last all 2-3 floors. So, okay, moving on. Switches and doors. Doors are enchanted heavily to respond to unintended use and manipulation. DC 20 Wisdom save. Effects and costs are up to the GM. This is just me reminding myself, like, don't let them fuck with doors. If they try to, make it a really high check. And honestly, DC 20 isn't as high as I think I expected it to be with some paladins and bless spells. So I might have just made it an auto fail. Like if you all had like tried to ram a door, I probably would have just consumed the item. Otherwise, there's just different types of doors. Rune doors were really important, I think, to the dungeon, to keeping you all honest with door mechanics and not abusing like those entryways. Which in Fatal 1 we saw kind of got manipulated quite a bit and made encounters last really long. I didn't really like it. But in retrospect, one of the lessons learned, which we'll get to, is like y'all ended up standing by the entrance to most rooms, and I didn't, and not moving unless I forced you to, which is why a lot of later encounters forced movement for various reasons. Yes, and then the truth. The PCs are characters from many stories. The floors and rooms of the dungeon are recreations of scenes and legends from stories. The author has created this dungeon to simulate how characters from other stories would fare in stories outside of their own. The magic used to simulate this, like AI machine learning algorithms, is called pretensomancy. Pretense being like predetermined. So all of the information is given to the storybook and it just runs different permutations. Okay. So, any questions about the dungeon? I'm about to move on to the author herself and some of her...
Let's do it. Let's look at her.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry.
No.
Damn it, John. Identify spell. Had you factored how the identify spell would have worked on any of this stuff? Because I don't see it in your notes.
What does identify do?
It would have identified...
So the answer is no.
The answer is no to that one? You
choose one object that you must touch through the casting of the spell. This takes 1 minute. And it requires a pearl of 1 GP and an owl feather. Ooh, interesting. If it's a magic item or some other magic imbued object, you learn its properties and how to use them, whether it requires attunement to use and how blah, blah, blah. I mean, well, what would
like,
you
if we'd identified the door, would it have told us everything about the door and how to use it?
I mean,
it is made of magic.
I would have told you the effects of the door. Mm-hmm. Yes. Absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I'm totally fine sharing that stuff with you all. You discovered it through play one way, and you could have done it a lot easier with that spell.
Fair enough. That's all I have for that.
Okay.
I have other questions for, like, the end. That's good.
Ignorance, this question, the question you just posted, I think you asked it somewhere else, and I have that on my list here. So, the author, we have some questions about here. I'm going to go over her stats at the end, as when we get to that floor. But Rumble Roar asks, I'm assuming the author isn't truly dead. Who does she tell these stories to? No one. This is her book simulating stuff to give her an answer, which I don't know if she finds, and that is
so sad and tragic.
Yep.
So, like, she did all of it for nothing?
I mean, like, she's...
Personal entertainment, man.
In
Personal
my head
entertainment.
canon, she's traveling for months and months and months across Arcadia, like, talking to people, like, finding other stories, information and stuff to just feed into her book to test out. And the book, the magic takes a long time. So, like, her spellbook is just running computations in her bag while she's traveling. And I think in the last scene of the last episode, I kind of alluded to, like, she reaches a mountain. The book basically, like, the light stops, resulting in it being done. She looks at it, she frowns, and then she just kind of, like, smirks and moves on. I don't know what she got. We don't have to answer that question.
Well,
Convince,
my book
convince
characters
Neil to
hate
let me play that character, and we'll learn more, I'm sure. Okay, so no one. Her magic book is running simulations. Yeah, okay. That you have my answer. Leova asks, "I'd love to know more about the author's journeys and adventures." Me too. Where did she visit? What strange creatures did she encounter? I'm sure plenty. What's her next step? I don't know. I didn't have to write that, so I didn't. I like to leave blank spaces and not fill them if I don't have to, which is like, as evidenced by the last 6 months of play. I clearly didn't write all of the rules I could have, and I didn't, to leave room for interpretation. Fuck you, Neil. Dicing with Apollo. Sessions start at midnight Pacific time. 5-hour sessions. Come on by.
You can handle it. We handled it.
Yeah.
5 hours past midnight.
What'd say?
I mean, so in my headcanon, she is a powerful enchantress or sorcerer or wizard. I don't know her class, but she is not combat focused. She is an author. She uses other types of magic to inspire people to see like what the possibilities are. So I think it like as close to whoever specializes in illusion magic. That's probably her skill set. Okay. One other question I have listed here about the author. Now that Dr. Daniel Jackson has acquired the pen of the author, asks Rumble Roar, what shenanigans would the SG-1 crew get up into? No crazier than the stuff in Stargate SG-1.
I'm about to say, yeah.
I mean, if you want a little...
But now he's... What does the pen do? Let's back that up.
It's her writing implement. It's a spellcasting focus. For her avatar in the book, like her
it's a fucking
projection
pen,
of
Rumble
herself.
Roar, get past it.
Yeah, nothing. Yeah. Also, when they stepped through the Stargate, they disappeared. Dr. Daniel Jackson doesn't exist anymore until another simulation of the SG-1 team gets run. Fuck them.
Right. Not only is it a spellcasting focus, but it's a simulated, non-existent, not real spellcasting focus.
None of what happened in the game is real.
Yep.
We all live in a simulation.
Get off his back.
Okay. I think those are all the questions about the author. We will get to the author's mechanics and character sheet, which is a very long one. Okay, let's move over to lessons learned. I have my Google Doc here, which I shared much earlier. I'll go ahead and share this link again in the Twitch chat if people want to view it. It's also in the Discord. Here are my notes on the floors and the CR calculations. Let's just start here. The first tab. So I used a website, carstark.co.uk here, to calculate the CR of every room, and then I used that to sum them up the entire floors. So here, like, I'm going to use the Colosseum as an example. If all of the creatures of the Colosseum were all in one encounter, that is a CR22 encounter, which is what this row 10 is. And then the sum of the path, each path, is the row 11. So like you all encountered 40 CR worth of creatures and encounters there. And I did a lot of estimation for some of my homebrew characters, as well as a lot of the traps. So here you can see, like, some paths were more difficult than others. I highlighted in green the paths that other parties took. And then if we look at the far right, there was a total of 669 CR defeated.
Nice.
If you don't include the failed attempts.
Nice.
So like the path you all chose for success was 669 CR.
Guys, we did it. Nice.
I think I ran the numbers. If one single party
High
went
five,
through here,
chat.
They would be like level 13 by the time they finished. Anyway, good job.
It's only level 13 though. That's what's funny.
Yeah, I'm gonna move on to principles and lessons learned. Oh, actually, I have this in my other document here. I wrote this out. Other lessons learned. So, no, I'm gonna use my dip. So I have my principles again. Lessons learned. I think because I had to quickly tune up the entire dungeon, that was a failure on my part from the very get-go. I did not do enough research and forethought to think about that. When I play tested the dungeon, it was one party running through everything, and I fed them a lot of resources, so they did snowball. And that was just kind of fun. But I think if I were to do this again with the same format, or at least a similar format, I would not have necessarily 4 level 6s, maybe 4 level 5s, or 3 level 6s. But keep in mind that if you do that, you have to like throw a lot more resources and tools at the party with more gear, more treasure, and also tune down a lot of the encounters. Spirit Guardians is insane. I don't like it.
Hey, same here. That's
So
why we use it.
You know, maybe with 3 characters, it would be easier to get rid of it. I think, you know, it is what it is, but there were just some floors that you all just wrecked with it. Rests.
Hate the spell so much.
For a show or a challenge where the purpose is to make the run, you know, a threat to get through just floor, having no rests is good, because then it forces you to use all of your resources and not snowball into 2 or more floors. So I thought that worked really well. Starting gold was really unbalanced, because some classes and backgrounds just got way different amounts of gold. And there were so many potions of healing that you all bought. I didn't really want potions of healing to be a thing, and I made the decision to allow it. Maybe I should have gotten rid of it. Or maybe I should have cut out backgrounds. Or maybe I should have set, like, you know, an amount of gold for the party. That could have complicated things with, you know, communicating back and forth to figure out who gets how much gold, but... you know, for example, here monks start with almost 38 gold, whereas fighters 263. That's that's ridiculous.
Yep.
Apollo, that's something that Shadow had us focus on every time we prepared, was what background were we picking so we could max our money.
Yeah, backgrounds.
And
we abused it because it was a mechanic we could abuse.
Almost everyone took like the merchant or guild artisan. And also it gave you skills. Most skills weren't used in the dungeon, so that's maybe one other thing I could have focused on more, was tasks that required more skill checks. So I guess that's another lesson. Sharpshooter and Great Weapon Master, they just make low to mid CR creatures negligible, and you can just nuke them down. They also make hard monsters negligible sometimes. I mean, that last dungeon fight, you all did really well. I think you didn't really use Sharpshooter on the dragons, though.
The Sharpshooter on the dragons was more for the range than for anything else. Having 400 feet range and regular shots was worth the feat. I think I used the actual Sharpshooter part maybe 3 or 4 times. Yeah. It was still worth the feat.
Yeah.
I think Plum actually the only one that used Sharpshooter for what's other uses.
Yeah. Let's see. Sharpshooter was used 5 times in the dungeon, whereas Great Weapon Master was used only once.
Hey, Millman.
Yeah.
The Chad.
So
hero.
The other thing I have here, variant humans. Don't allow it. I honestly would recommend don't allow it. Or limit it like one, you know, maybe I could say like you have to use one of each race. Or
now you're going too far. Variant humans
if you look at the party stats tab and scroll down to like row 66, I ran the stats. More than half of characters in the dungeon were variant human, which is ridiculous. Not a single person used regular human, and there were no dragonkin among. I think there was at least one other kin type that wasn't used.
Dragonborn?
That's what I said. Did I say dragonkin?
Yeah, it's fine. I forgive you.
Those serpent people.
You made a pie graph? What the heck?
Pie graphs. Pie.
There's graphs.
There's
Scroll down,
graphs.
chat. It's worth it.
Oh my god.
Did somebody use a gnome?
A gnome.
A rock
There
gnome.
were gnomes.
We had one.
There were gnomes? Okay.
1 gnome, maybe 2 gnomes.
2 rock
It had to be
gnomes.
2 because it looks like Drow has the smallest at one point.
Yeah, that was rude.
There was 1 mountain dwarf and 1 half orc. That half orc did really well.
Yep.
Despite the fact that they got stuck in a room.
Mountain Dwarf was Mrs. Peacock. Yeah,
That's right.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I want to say that the one party you challenged us not to use variant humans, and we didn't, and we still had a strong.
I
group,
appreciate
so,
that. I mean, if you hadn't, we would be at 60% variant humans. So.
Probably.
So yeah, those are some of my lessons learned, I think, and things to consider if you want to create your own type of Deadly Dungeon or use Deadly Dungeon yourself in the future. I'm sure everyone is thinking about using a dungeon that consumes 110 hours to play. So I have a lot of
sounds
questions here. Leova asks, were there any class concepts that weren't done that you wished had been? Well, I didn't really have any preconceptions for that, but this second graph kind of shows us how disparaging the class selection was. This includes people's like second class options. So it isn't just primary classes, and even there were some groups that did 3 and 3. So that's why I included it like this. But yeah, fighter was really popular because they just are killer. Clerics were incredible for healing. Artificers just had so much utility and strength. Paladins, all same. Rogues were really popular, especially the Psychic Blade, the Soul Knife rogues. And I have the breakdown of all of these also here in my Google Doc by subclass. So I think the most popular was Battlesmith, Soul Knife Rogue, Vengeance Paladins were pretty popular, and Life Clerics. We had 4 of those.
Goodberry.
Yep. What was the most creative spell you witnessed, says John, GM?
Yeah.
I
don't think in such blunt words, but yeah.
Let's see.
Oh yeah, it was. Wow. What was the most creative use of spells you witnessed?
Yeah, so I think...
So what combos?
Yeah, so the Rob using a rope trick and his owl, whatever that spell's called, where he had the owl find his familiar. That was, of course, very interesting and forced me to just just make decisions about what was happening very quickly. But I think the one that I liked the most was when you all got stuck in the fog cloud of the spooky estate, where you all used the thorn whip to pull each other out. That was honestly my favorite.
Still have nightmares of that.
We had to play fucking Marco Polo for so long.
Yeah.
I didn't know what was going on. I was by myself. I was trying to short rest.
You all are gonna look at the mechanic for that and just be like, "Whoa, Nick, that's brutal." But you all had a way to pull people out of it, which was really good.
Yeah, lucky us.
Yeah. Do any of you have any other like creative spell uses that you really liked that come to your mind? Like first thing that comes to your mind.
Misty Step. I love it. Because I didn't even think about it, because going into that room, which we'll get to that room eventually, but I'm thinking I'm just going to fucking fireball something, right? I got a level 3 spell slot. It's the final room. And then I scrolled and I was like, oh my God, I have Misty Step. And then I calced it out and it was exactly the amount of distance. I was like, oh, this is just too perfect.
Yeah.
Sorry, John. You didn't know that was happening. You weren't in the Discord chat with us.
That's fine. I'm just gonna say it, guys. Jamie K, if you're out there, you are a brutal murderer, having twin cast Darkness and Spirit Guard. Like, what is wrong with you? That is a eraser move, where you just go and destroy a town. That's brutal. I had no part in that, by the way. I denounce my involvement in it. All right, I'm done naming.
I think Shadow with his fairy fire against the pixie that was invisible. Yes. I'm sitting there just yelling at the screen. I'm like, use fairy fire, and then he just poof, there's fairy fire.
That was a good one. Yeah, and I think also the gust of wind against the Gith right after that encounter.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was crazy.
Okay. John also asks, what did you focus on more, the environment of the dungeon or the monsters? I think I don't know. It kind of depended on the encounter. Sometimes I got an idea of what the room would be and what the encounter would look like, and then I filled it with creatures. Sometimes it was just me going through the monster manual, and at the very end I used Mordenkainen's Totem of Foes for some of the stuff in the Court of the Raven King. And I just, looked at that and thought, oh, let me fill a role of like a not a courtesan, but like a court member. So it kind of depended. As we'll see. John also asked, when building the encounters, was it you looking... Oh, yeah, this basically I already answered this. Looking at the monster manual and picking what seemed cool, or were you trying to make ultimate combos to kill the players? Sometimes, yes. What was if the latter, what was your favorite monster combo you implemented? It wasn't so much a monster combo, but just, I think, on the platform floor... the moving platform, which what did I call that floor? The race. Just like the Chain Devil and the Ropers and Harpies, just these things that force you all to like have restricted movement or slow down, and the risk of missing the platform and having to deal with that, which could just be the end, unless you have a way of dealing with that.
Dead certain that those stupid harpies were going to kill BA, and I was loving it and frustrated at the same time.
Thank God.
You'll notice that floor had the lowest CR total of any floor, but it was just as potentially lethal if you didn't have a way of getting back to the start to restart the platform, because if you can't move around the rest of the floor, you can't get back. You die.
You said at the beginning of that, yeah, the walls looked like they could be climbable. I'm like, oh God. No.
Oh yeah.
God, no.
I have a note on how difficult it is to traverse it, and I basically we'll get to it. We'll get to it. Yeah. So honestly, like that, not like necessarily having the most lethal like damage dealing, but like the combination of mechanics with the creatures. I'm really proud of those. Shadow asks, what are things you liked or disliked from Fatal 1, and how did that factor into your creation of the dungeon? Doors were a big one, which is why I did runed doors. I didn't like rests, so I just eliminated the option for the most part. If you did the math on that, the mechanic for the dungeon where, the pacing, I roll 4d20, it is possible that there is room for a rest, but it is so unlikely. And in fact, there were times that you all could have rested based on my rolls. But I established that basically we're couldn't, because I didn't want you to. What were some other things I didn't like about Fatal 1? I didn't like that people could stack classes, so that's why I limited classes to one per party. It's basically all there in the original rules and with the doors for the most part. Around rests, those were the only gripes I had. It was just, and it wasn't that I didn't like them. I did like the risk, especially around rests, and I liked being able to stack classes to create cool combinations. But I wanted to really push the community to think differently. So this dungeon was an experiment to try things differently. McTacky asked, what were your expectations on community engagement with this community campaign? What would you have done differently at the start that you know to do now? I didn't really have any expectations. I kind of designed the format so that people didn't really have to map a lot, because there wasn't really a lot to the floors. There was only a couple encounters and not this massive space you had to map every possible way to, and specific notes on specific things. I mean, you could have, and I think Shadow, you did a really good job of doing that, but it was kind of unnecessary.
Probably was.
So, so there's that. I didn't expect people to roleplay, but they did, which was just lovely. It was so fun to roleplay with you all and enjoy that creativity. I mean, the things I would have done differently are just these like lessons learned stuff. There's not a lot, honestly. Okay, John asked me, any disappointing moments on your end that you felt, such as mechanics being ignored, a path not taken, or something that the players missed out on? Yeah, I mean, I designed multiple pass-through things, so of course, when a floor got beat and a room didn't get explored, that was a little disappointing. But we'll get to see those rooms and enjoy what they could have been in our minds. Other than that, no. Like, if you all cheesed a mechanic, I tried to punish you in ways that I could and let it go and move on to the next floor. What was your favorite themed party and why was it Stargate SG-1? Well, because Stargate SG-1 is like one of my favorite TV shows. But really, like, they were all so lovely. We had I didn't really come up with names for some of the groups, but like even Party 3 with Georgie Fruit and Macbeth, Zagig and Malcolm Finehand, like they were so fun. The role playing on all of these was so good. You all will never get me to watch Clue. The Linguini family was so cute. The
How have you still not seen that movie?
The Harrison Ford. Oh my god, that one was a silly one. This Harrison Ford character, like I made this rollable table with a token you can generate and then just roll it. You just roll it. Give me a random side. Give me a random side of this token. Give me a random side of this token. Cool. That's wonderful. I love that. I loved all of these parties. They were so good.